Growing up in Brisbane, it was an interesting time because it was a time of change and we were going through a period where there were new things being developed all the time. You know, it's hard to remember, but things like mobile phones didn't exist. I remember when TV first came out.
Brisbane still was in 59 that big country town. I mean, I love that big country town aspect.
There was a time when the southern press used to incessantly run stories about why Queenslanders are different. So, yeah, there was definitely a perception that Queensland was a very strange place, and the reality is that culturally it's a bit different here.
It was trams, steam trains into the city, nothing happening after 6 o'clock at night. I guess when I was a teenager and bored with the suburbs, to come into the valley or the city was what we did. Smoking was very pivotal in my teenage years. Finding places to smoke was really important for some reason.
When you look at all those movies of the early 1960s, it was virtually obligatory for the people, male and female, to have a cigarette in their hand. So there was no great concern about lung cancer at that stage or the evils of smoking. Out at the university, there were smokos. There was a lot of that rowdy, larrikin, bushy sort of a style of men will be men. I suppose the women were a little more sophisticated, but most of these events were all male-dominated in any case.
I think one of the first really defining moments in Queensland history was the 1971 Springbok tour when Premier Joh Bjelke-Petersen declared a state of emergency. Hordes of police lined up, young people got chased down the hill. It was quite dramatic, and I think that was one of the first times that those sorts of images were seen on TV in Queensland, and people started to go, there's something going on here.
Music is often, post-50s anyway, is at the heart of lots of either political or social movements. And so it was the same for this, and they're a bit inextricable, the music and the social stuff.
4ZZZ started playing a really different kind of music and always had a kind of political view of the world and weren't afraid to express it. And so that was a real magnet to young people, and it was really around 4ZZZ and the campus of University of Queensland where things were really happening, and that's where the Canto Times started. It was about a voice for young people in Queensland and having a different view of politics to the mainstream media, which was pretty conservative at the time. One of the big moments was 1977 when more than 400 people were arrested. Yeah, it made international media, like here in Brisbane, hundreds of people deliberately getting themselves arrested to show up a repressive government.
From the very beginning, I had a degree of suspicion and hesitancy about the police force in Queensland. There were police bashings, there was poofter bashing, and often the police were involved.
In a space, it feels like it's very open and unrestrained, and at the same time, we're young people living in a city where you can get beat up, walking up the street. You get thrown in jail for looking the wrong way at somebody or wearing the wrong clothes or having the wrong haircut. And we would put on dances at places and the police would come and, take the money and close the thing down and arrest people.
It was an astonishing time of the Fitzgerald inquiry.
Well, we all knew there were brothels down in the valley, and that's why it did seem totally ludicrous when Russ Hinze, as police minister, says, no, there are no brothels and there's none of this taking place. But the extent of it was quite amazing.
It did change Queensland politics forever. It brought about the end of the National Party government, but it also brought in a whole lot of recommendations which were brought in to try and ensure this sort of corruption wouldn't occur again.
Over the past 50 years, there have been many restrictions on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. If we look at Brisbane itself, there was restrictions around who could go where. There's so many stories about people not being allowed to cross the bridge, and some of those stories have quite tragic ends. And these are stories I can't easily find in a history book either. They're the storyteller stories, which still have weight?
I think that there was certainly a time in Queensland when young people in particular felt restricted, and I think that there are still people who feel restricted in society. I think the situation for Aboriginal people has been very bad since white people arrived, and they've definitely been restricted in their freedoms. And now refugees here in Australia are treated poorly, and they're definitely restricted. Look at gay people. They're restricted, they can't marry who they want to.
For a lot of my life, since I was hiding under this cloud of am I gay, am I not, initially I didn't really want to know and thought I could lead two lives. I wouldn't have been game back in 1959 in Queensland perhaps even to have thought of it.
There's lots of restrictions. You just have to look around, and we're all restricted in different ways.
Other Indigenous youth have quite mixed feelings about freedom. Freedom is obviously being able to say and do and act how you want, but then that then leads to less freedom for someone else. Is that really freedom? Or it's having the privilege, which we all have, but some people then have the power of freedom, and they're very different things.
All the time, you have to make sort of value judgments about, is this freedom really good for humans, or is it just, someone's personal indulgence? And that's what civil society and civil discourse is. So we try to navigate those minefields and make a better society for everyone.
I think that when you explore music or you explore visual art, it's absolutely amazing what has happened in Brisbane and how nationally and internationally significant some of those moments have been.
I think one of the things that actually really, really changed things was when they opened Goma. I mean, that really, really scared the bejesus out of the big southern institutions, that Queensland would open a world-class art gallery that was doing things that were far more interesting and edgy than anything else going on in Australia.
Is it just mainstream's perception of what opportunities and freedoms are that lead you then to question whether other people even have freedom? And perhaps some of the people that you might think don't have freedom have more freedom than you can ever dream of.
Maybe notions of freedom are really defined by notions of restriction. It's about we don't notice freedoms until they're lost or stolen or whatever the case may be.
So I feel like I've been given a certain amount of freedom because of what other people have done, and therefore it's my role to use that freedom to create more freedom for the next generation of Indigenous young people.
People desperately need to be able to just do what they want to do without other people judging them. I think that is one of the greatest restrictions on people's freedom of thought or action or feeling that exists, is that kind of the judgmental nature of us, which basically says, you're not good enough, you're not good enough to share this world with me, whereas we're all good enough.
I hope that everyone perhaps gets the freedom of balance in this country, like white, black or whoever, because then if we have like a true perception of perhaps our history and our culture, then perhaps that'll give more freedom to all of us, particularly our young people.
In some ways things improve, in some ways we go backwards. However, we all have to be vigilant, and we all have to remember that freedom is something that it isn't just set. We just have to keep fighting for it.